The episode archive of Your Creative Push is now easier than ever to navigate. Head to yourcreativepush.com and click episodes at the top. There you'll see all the episodes listed by date and by genre. Every episode of YCP is meant to inspire you, regardless of your creative passion, but you can now easily find the ones that fit your creative medium when you need a little extra push. Your Creative Push, episode 241.
Quit trying to go viral. Quit trying to have overnight success. Quit looking for shortcuts and just get on the journey.
Welcome to Your Creative Push, the podcast that pushes you to pursue your creative passions. I'm your host, Youngmin Brown, and my guest today is Andy J. Miller, aka Andy J. Pizza. He is an illustrator and the host of the Creative Pep Talk Podcast. Just a super motivational guy that I've been meaning to get on this podcast for a long time. It's been a long time coming, and he totally delivered in this episode. We talk about a lot of things, including his history as an illustrator and how the Creative Pep Talk podcast started. We talk about the value of teaching and of mentorship, and how you should be thinking about helping other people out along their journeys, and that will help you along your journeys no matter how much experience you have, no matter how far along your journey you are. A lot of the themes from his podcast came up in this episode, including his recent Creative Destiny series. We also talked about the hero's journey and the idea of finding your gift and then giving it away. Another big thing we talked about was the idea of creative blocks and gut churn and forcing yourself to sit in that very uncomfortable position of the unknown, of not knowing how you're going to find a solution, even though you know a solution is out there. Just a wonderful conversation with Andy. A lot of the gems from his show came up in this episode, and it's really a great preview of what his podcast is like. So if you like this episode, you must subscribe to his. So please enjoy, be inspired, get pepped up with my conversation with Andy Miller. Andy J. Pizza, man, welcome to the show.
Hello, nice to be here, man. Thanks for having me.
Dude, it's a real pleasure and an honor, and I think this will be great for... I'm sure a lot of people that listen to this podcast probably listen to yours already, but if they don't, they definitely should, whether really any kind of creative field. Like I myself am not an illustrator, I'm a writer, but I get so much value from your show, and you just have so much excitement, and I'm just really looking forward to speaking with you today, man.
That's awesome. Hey, thanks. I really appreciate those kind words, and yeah, let's do it.
Let's do it. So first of all, Andy J. Pizza. I actually don't know how that name started. Because Andy J. Miller,
yeah.
But where the pizza thing? Just because you're pepped up with pepperoni, or
that's pretty much it. I mean,
yeah.
Here's the thing. So it's funny because like a more accurate version these days would probably be Andy J. Salad, because I've been on like a diet for like 2.5 years, and so I don't eat as much pizza as I used to.
Oh no!
It was pretty much an actual addiction to pizza, and and I deeply love it. But where it actually came from was my name's Andy J. Miller, which is like there's like literally 3 million of those in every city, and so I couldn't get a good domain name, and my domain name was Andy-J-Miller.com, and it's just the worst domain name in the world. And so like a few years ago, they released a bunch of different new suffixes, if you will, for domain names. And one of them was .pizza. And I was like, that's sweet. So I picked up andyj.pizza, and then everybody just started calling me that. It was just supposed to be my domain name. But then, yeah, it turned into my new identity. So
right
there it is.
And do you ever struggle with this? Is not going to sound like a weird question, but it's actually serious, because Michael Young is my real name, but Youngman Brown is my pen name.
Yeah.
So like I have found recently, especially with the podcast now that it's taking off, like people call me Youngman Brown, and it just still feels weird. And then also like on the Facebook group, like I'm in there as Mike Young, and like that confuses people too. Do you ever actually like struggle with the idea of having to kind of
Yeah, not really. Honestly, this is like the dumbest thing to say, but I feel like Andy J. Pizza is my true self that I've become over the past couple years. And there's a part of it that I feel like I was always looking for my real name. I always felt like, like in ancient times where people would go through some kind of crucible moment and be given a new name. I like always wanted that to happen in my life because I was like, I don't know. I was just like not satisfied with Andy Miller. It just sounded like the most boring. It just didn't feel like me. And so, I don't know. I've welcomed the change. I like that it's, on it's original to the point where every platform that can be my, username. And I love that. And I also love that it's just not self-serious. And so it kind of sets the tone. And, one of the things like going around and doing talks and giving people creative career advice could get pretty stuffy and kind of high horse like. And so I love that it kind of sets the tone from the get-go. One of the things I always think about is I'm super weird. I'm just a really weird guy. And I liked it back in the day. I had these giant glasses and they looked ridiculous. And I loved them because it gave me no opportunity to hide. Like I could never pretend like I was normal. And so I like the name Andy J Pizza because it doesn't give me any opportunity to play it cool. Like there's just no hiding that I'm ridiculous and it's all out there in the open. So, but I feel you. The only annoying thing for me now is that, on like Amazon, I have like 4 or 5 books that are under Andy J Miller. And the next book that I do, I really want to release it under Andy J Pizza, but it just feels like it's ruining, the congruity there. So, but yeah, does that answer your question?
That answers my question very fully. And I agree. It's like sometimes you're looking for your new name. And I think actually like creative people can really take inspiration from that too. It's like setting up a new kind of identity for yourself whereas like before you're kind of scared to kind of show your true self, but like through your art, through your creativity, you can. And it's like stepping into that name, he who eats all the pizza, like whatever it is.
Right.
Like,
and I'm always bonding with people over pizza. And there's this quote by Alan Watts that I really like that says, it's something like, no one's obligated to be the person they were 5 seconds ago. And my friend Kyle Sheely, who's like a full-time public speaker, is doing this project where he's going to do just this massive, elaborate project where he's helping people set fire to their past selves and kind of step into the world that they create for themselves. And so I like it as a message, too, of like, you can reinvent yourself and you don't have to be owned by the person that you used to be. And so I like it on kind of a deeper level too, even though I'm not like necessarily running from anything. I like how fresh it feels to have kind of a new name.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, so I guess we could introduce yourself a little bit for the people that don't know you.
Sure.
Maybe go pre-podcast, so like your kind of your illustration career.
Yeah, totally. So I'm an illustrator and a podcast. Before I ever had a podcast, I had, a full-time wage doing illustration for brands like Nickelodeon and Converse and Sony and blah, 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 brands. And I'd done all kinds of different work with agencies and brands around my illustration. My illustration is kind of like, Mary Blair meets Yellow Submarine, if that paints a picture for anybody. That's pretty much exactly what it looks like. And, it's fun. It's whimsical. There's lots of psychedelic magic. I got obsessed with this idea of drawing invisible things, and that just the idea that illustration's purpose, like photography's purpose, can be to capture what's really there. And illustration's purpose is like to capture what can't be seen. Like there's no other way to see this other than to create an illustration of it. And so that's kind of what I saw my illustration career to be. That it was always about how can I show things that there's no other way to actually visually see. And I did that for all kinds of different brands. And even, I started the podcast probably when I was like 28. So like 8 years into my journey as an illustrator. But even after like 2 years on my path, as soon as I started like getting real illustration jobs, I instantly wanted to turn around and help anybody else that could do that. So I was already like writing a blog, and I was always kind of coaching my friends of like, here's how you could, position your work in the market for maximum results. And I was always thinking strategically about how can I help creative people thrive? Because when I was a kid, I was different. I still am different. And all of the normal things I wasn't thriving at. I wasn't terrible at all of them. I was really terrible at basketball, really terrible at sports, really terrible at like being a cashier part-time. Like I would lose tons of money. I was pretty bad at like general math. I actually found out that I'm like synesthesia. I have that for numbers, where I kind of associate personalities with numbers, and that would distract me from doing my times table tests, because I would be seeing like all of these interactions between the personalities of numbers. So anyway, I'm way off track. But basically, as I was growing up, I knew that I was a lot like my mom. And everybody always told me, you're just like your mom. And when I was a kid, I loved that. When I was really little, I didn't live with her. She left our family and kind of did her own thing and got into all kinds of trouble and just all kinds of disasters. And so as I grew up and I was like 13, all of a sudden, all of that "you're just like your mom" stuff started to sound like a doomsday prophecy. Where I'm like, oh, I'm just like my mom. I'm going to turn out to be a tragedy, a disaster, because I'm this weird creative person like my mom. And so I think as soon as I started to have some breakthrough and started to see like I might be able to thrive as a human being just the way that I am, I was desperate to go back to my high school friends that were like me, who were struggling, and say, this is what I was doing. This is what's helped me get a little bit further on this mission. And then I have a lot of high school friends that are more talented than me, more creative than me, that just couldn't find a path, couldn't figure it out, and ended up getting into all kinds of problems and trouble. And so anyway, that slowly, as I developed a full-time career, I was already writing a blog, already trying to help creative people. And at some point I launched the Creative Pep Talk Podcast. That was like 2014. And just started to try to systematically catalog everything that I'd learned about how to thrive as a creative person in your creative career. And that's been the past couple years. And now I split my time between Creative Pep Talk stuff and illustration. So that's the long kind of version.
Well, and I think you bring up like a really, really, really important point for people. It's really important to see yourself on a path and to see that the people that are a little bit behind you, and it doesn't even have to be your specific path. It could just be like life, like where like you're like, all right, I started down this like path and here's what I learned. And you don't have to start a podcast or start a blog or anything like that. It's like just to recognize where you're at the path, and like to see the people that are a little bit behind you to like kind of spur them forward. I don't know. It not only helps them and it not only helps you, but it also lets you see where you're at on the path and see that you still have room to grow. You still have a journey to go down yourself. I don't know. It's just really important to teach.
I totally agree. And I think, I think there's two things here. So this whole idea of mentorship, I think that one of the things that's really fascinating about getting into those relationships where you're mentoring people, or people are mentoring you, it's almost always a two-way street. So, the people that are younger than you, that are not as far down the path, they're going to be teaching you about new things. So if I'm mentoring somebody who's like 22 as a 31-year-old, they're going to be teaching me stuff from a perspective of what it's like to just be getting in the game. They're going to be teaching me about new trends, and they're going to keep me fresh, right? While I'm helping them kind of go further down the path. So I find those relationships extremely powerful. And then beyond that, I found teaching to be the ultimate growth hack, because when you have to systematically boil down your truths, all of a sudden they become so much more potent in your own life. And so for me, I feel like I was a above average illustrator before I started the podcast, and I had a good salary and all that jazz. But I feel like once I had to articulate what I thought it was to be a great creative, all of a sudden my own practice just dramatically improved because I synthesized all that information and I could use it and it was more readily available for me. So yeah, I think it's incredibly important wherever you are on the journey to look around and help people both ahead of you and behind you.
I like that idea of boiling down your truths.
Yeah.
Like it's hard to do, and I think that's for me what one of the benefits of writing does. Just boiling down my truths of what I think about life and just what I think about the kind of creative process, and just knowing where you stand as a human being. It's hard to do when you're just kind of inside your own head. So whether it's reaching out to other people or kind of like going internally and writing down your truths, I think is like really, really important.
Yeah, totally true. And we might get to this a little bit later if we talk about creative block, but I think that our culture has this incredibly weird, adverse attitude about thinking, which just sounds crazy when you say it, but it's incredibly important to spend time thinking. And I think anytime you start thinking, you're like, hey, I'm thinking about this. Almost every time in our culture, you're going to get this response of, why are you overthinking things? We're like, no, I'm not overthinking it. I'm just thinking. And thinking is a good thing. And I think reflecting on what you know and what you're going through and trying to even just capture it through writing or recording it or whatever, that's how you systematically work through what's going on. And that's how you actually make progress.
No, I couldn't agree more.
Yep.
Before we get into like some of your specific episodes and some of the things that you're super keen on, I know you've mentioned in your podcast before that you got like some flack from the industry when you started the podcast.
Yeah.
And can you talk about that a little bit? Because I don't know specifically what you were referring to. So people in the industry just didn't like what you had to say, or the fact that you were saying it, or?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say this, and this is, I think, important to say, that probably 50% of, when I'm talking about getting flack for being a person out there trying to help people, 50% of that flack, so to speak, is in my own mind. And then 50% is stuff that people have actually said. So just to talk about in my own mind, I have conversations with myself about how I feel like people might be perceiving me, or based on what I've heard people say in the past, what they might be saying behind my back. And so, first of all, I think it's just a terrible way to go on your journey, to defeat yourself before you even start, by just all of this imagined feedback. I think that just, kills your journey before you even set off. So a lot of that was just knowing that in the past, when I would talk about creativity through the lens of logic instead of through the lens of magic, like those are kind of two different lenses to see reality. And I think historically, creative people are a lot more comfortable with kind of magical talk in terms of like the muse and, well, you never know what's going to work, and it's all a lottery, and it's all random, and da-da-da-da-da. I think that creatives are really, really comfortable with that kind of language. I think we hide behind that language. I think we use it as an excuse for why we can't perform, or why we can't progress, or why people don't like our work, or whatever, right? And I do think that there's a place for magic in creativity, just in terms of like, your greatest work often is going to have a quality that you couldn't have planned for. But I think that, historically we maybe gave magic 80% of our headspace when it comes to creativity and creative careers, when really it's, maybe more like 50-50. And so anytime in the past, even before I started the podcast, I would talk about creative careers or creativity or what I was going through. And I was trying to uncover the principles and the guidelines and just all of the ideas that were helping me consistently make progress, right? And so every time I would talk like that, or every once in a while, I would just get flack from people face to face of like, spitting back cliches or platitudes about how creativity is completely random. So then, I think I would get a lot of, anytime you start bringing strategy into creativity, there's a lot of creative people that are going to think that makes it impure. When you talk about marketing your creative work, then people think that makes it impure in some way. And I just kind of had come to the place where I decided that great creative work doesn't have to be soiled by marketing if you approach it the right way, or business the right way, and actually it can enhance it. And great creative work without marketing and business doesn't necessarily guarantee success or you thriving as a person. And so I was just kind of hell-bent on marrying these two in a pure way that helps other people be successful. And I think I just knew that some people weren't going to like that. And I do know that some people don't like that. And then beyond that, as I started to enter the space of making money from creative education, I knew that there would be people that were going to have a critique on that, whether that was sponsors for the podcast or online course or whatever. I totally know that there are scammers and sharks out there online that are trying to rip people off with no value. And, they're basically like con artists. And I know that they exist. But it doesn't mean that all online courses or all money through education is a scam. And actually, one of the things that kept me going, even through some online critique, people on Twitter, there was a handful of times where either people were passively aggressively kind of talking about anybody that makes money online through creative education as, a scam artist, or personally kind of, there was at least one point where someone kind of called out one of my courses, and luckily a whole swarm of creative professionals and industry people came to support what I do and say that I'm on the up and up and I'm doing good things. Anyway, so there was at least one time where, I was kind of publicly critiqued, and all of that. I'm not good with confrontation. I don't, I'm like a lot of creative people in that I can be pretty insecure about things. And even when I try my best and I have the most integrity, it's easy to fall into self-doubt. And so one of the things that just kept me going through all of that is that, within the sphere of creative education, I really don't think it's the bottom feeder scam artist that we really need to concern ourselves with. I think we need to worry about the fact that there are people at the highest ranks of the higher education organizations in our country that are making millions and millions and millions of dollars off of people going deep into debt, especially within the creative world, which is a very difficult space to earn giant amounts of money. And
especially from the start.
Especially from the start. So it's just, and I'm not just writing off all art schools. So I'm not saying that at all. I think that, with the right circumstance, they can be one of the most powerful things that we currently have in our system. But I kind of have taken upon this mantle and said, somebody's got to think about how we reform creative education. And just because it's dicey territory doesn't mean that someone can't go in there and do it right, at least with the best intentions. So anyway, that's kind of my experience with getting flack online and how I've kind of processed it.
Yeah. And I think no matter what you do creatively, I think you're always going to get a few haters. I think that's
absolutely true.
And I think it's important to get haters too, because I think then that means you're doing something right. Because especially if you have people that love your work, which you will, if you're coming from the heart, that there's always going to be naysayers. There's always going to be people that for whatever reason aren't on board, but that kind of shows you that you're doing something that creates a discussion. Or if you're just in the middle ground, then you're not really like innovating.
Yep. And you're not, if nobody has, anything strong to say, whether good or bad, then nobody's having any strong response to what you're doing. And if nobody's having any real strong response to what you're doing, then why do it? Like, you're just more beige in the world, and we don't need any more of that, right? The internet is already plenty beige, plenty noisy as it is. So, that's good.
All right, well, let's get into like your podcast. You recently had this Creative Destiny series, which I think is like 6 parts.
I think it's 6 parts. Yeah.
And I think it's like a really Well, first of all, a really good place for people to start if they want to start listening to the podcast.
True. It is kind of like the bedrock of the podcast.
Yeah, you lay it out.
Yeah.
So can you talk about that and why you started doing that Creative Destiny series? I guess in this,
Sure.
I mean, you have quite a few episodes under your belt. So like, is this kind of like a redefining moment for the podcast, or you just kind of like, oh, here's like what I've learned by hashing it out, all these episodes, and here's like all of it at this point?
So the reason I did this series on Creative Destiny was I felt like I needed to kind of paint the picture of the core values of this podcast again. I felt like I hadn't done that since the earlier episodes, and that a lot of my core values and what this podcast is all about ends up getting scattered among, 25 episodes over half a year or whatever. And I just felt like I needed to, that I wanted to kind of claim my territory and just say, like, this is what I'm trying to tell you. This is what it's about. This is my perspective. If this is what you're looking for, this is the podcast for that. And so that was kind of the purpose of it. And, but I'll tell you the reason behind Creative Destiny and what that's all about is, probably at the center of my worldview is this idea that we are all chosen ones. And again, let me just say, I feel like this is a mythical kind of way to talk about deeper realities that may or may not be this mystical, or whatever you want to say, spiritual, whatever. But it's a really good way of talking about something that I think is true. And so I kept running into, throughout philosophy, throughout the ages, this same principle, which is this idea that we are all chosen ones. We are all people that have a purpose here in this world. And part of the reason why I'm convinced that this narrative is paramount and central to what it means to be human is that all cultures have told the same story over and over and over again. If you look at like Joseph Campbell, he wrote the book, A Hero of a Thousand Faces, and it's this idea of the hero's journey. And the hero's journey is this archetype story. It's this, the story of the chosen one. It's the Neo from the Matrix, Harry Potter, Luke Skywalker, Moana is my new favorite, Lego movie was the same. And we've literally, as humans, so ever since we started talking and telling stories, have been telling this story of the chosen one. And I think at some point we watched all the Harry Potters, right? And this is a few years ago. And I was like laying in my bed after the last one, and I was just so deeply moved by the narrative. Not necessarily, like, I do love Harry Potter, but it wasn't really about Harry Potter. It was something about this story that just moves me to my core, and clearly it moves millions and millions and millions of people throughout human history, maybe even billions of people. And I just sat there thinking, why? Why does this story mean so much to us? And I think part of it is that we're always looking for a messiah, and I could dive into that, but I don't really want I don't really want to go there just because I don't think it's relevant. But I think that's true. I think this Messiah idea is relevant to humans for sure. But I think on a more practical level, the reason why this story is our story is because it's everyone's story. Whether you're going to be, work at the post office, be an MBA player, be, a corporate accountant, or be a creative person, I deeply believe that there's something in us that feels compelled towards a particular type of work that we're supposed to be giving our lives to on this planet, no matter what it is we do. This idea that there is chosen work that we're uniquely cut out to fulfill. And for me, at least, that resonates with the deepest parts of who I am. And with a lot of the listeners and a lot of the people I talk to, I feel like that idea resonates. So this idea of what is the work that you're on this planet uniquely suited to accomplish between your experience and your DNA and who you are as a person? What is it that you're on this planet to go do? And who's the audience? Who are the people that need what you have. And that's kind of how I define this creative destiny. And so that's the motivating factor for me, is that I have this deep-seated belief and worldview that we're all here for a reason. Destiny maybe is too harsh of a word in my real beliefs. Like, I think it's a collaborative process with, our path, so that I think free will and choice and real creativity of coming up with a collaborative work with this chosenness, with this path. I don't think it's completely prescriptive, but I do think that when we exist on that plane, we are our best selves. And that story just resonates with me. And so that's where all of this comes from.
Yeah, and I think that's why people connect with those kinds of stories, is that we all have, I think you're completely right that we are all kind of chosen ones, but you don't need like a lightning scar on your head, or you don't need famous wizarding parents to kind of go on this like kind of epic journey. And I think that the thing that maybe holds a lot of people back is the fact that they think that becoming the most famous wizard in the world is the the end goal, like becoming like a super famous person, or like the best in your field, whatever that field may be, is the end goal, and that holds people back. But I think that the actual like destiny is actually just finding that thing, like you said, that we all kind of have inside of us. And I think that's also scary and holds people back too, is like, once they find this thing, like what if, they end up sucking at it, or what if they don't become the most famous person in the world? Like to try to realize that, no, it's just like actually finding that thing and finding the joy in creating that thing and being able to express yourself in the best way. That's where the real end goal is. That's where the journey should lead.
Yeah. And actually, I think that there are a lot of misconceptions about the path. And one of them is that finding your gift. So I kind of define it as two parts: finding your gift and giving it away. And they're both long journeys. They're two parts of a really long journey. And I think when you misunderstand that fundamental principle, you get into all kinds of trouble, because I think the first part, finding your gift, is a really long journey all on its own that requires tons of time and effort in trying things and experimenting and all of that jazz. And I think that a lot of people think that you can finish that part of the journey in an afternoon with a career aptitude test, or just some, a walk. Take a walk and figure out your gift, right? So that's where I think so many people go wrong initially, is that they don't realize, the first 10 years of the journey is working out what is the true unique cocktail that you have going on inside of you. What is that work that just explodes and radiates from your very being? That alone takes tremendous amounts of time, energy, and experiments. And actually, it's a process that's never done. You're always getting deeper layers of, I thought my gift was this, but actually I found there's this deeper layer as I tried it through this lens or that lens. And so that journey is this giant journey all on its own. And then I think a lot of people, what happens, they go out there, they work forever, they finally find this work that just comes naturally to them and explodes from them, and they master it, and it's amazing. And I think that part of the journey is that magic part. And that's why I think so many creative people get stuck in that magic side of the equation. And the way that I always tell it, it's like the journey to put the ring into the volcano, in Lord of the Rings. That's like this epic journey, and you get to the end, you throw the ring in the molten lava, and it's like celebration. And that's what it's like to find your gift, right? And when we're there, we always think that the giant eagles are going to come swoop in and take us all the way back, take us back to the people who need the elixir, to go back and say, hey, we go back to the Shire and say, we saved the day. You guys don't need to fret. Things are going to be fine. But the fact of the matter is, once you find your gift, you're only 50% done with the journey. And another 50% is figuring out what is the platform, what is the medium, what is the marketing strategy. That's when you have to bring it back home. You have to bring it to earth. You got to take it from the magic to the logic of now it's not enough just to have the magic. You got to figure out, how do I get this elixir? How do I get this gift to the people that need it in the way that they want to receive it? Meaning, how do you take your skill, your talent, and find out how to actually be profitable with it so that you can thrive as a person? Find out a way that a context that people are willing to pay for so that you can create a lifestyle around it so that you can spend a lifetime pursuing that relationship. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And I think it's important for people to recognize that too, like to reach that end goal, like beat the game essentially, like to get to the point where you're trying to get to. And then like you get back to like in Super Mario, like you beat it and then you get back to like the main screen. You have to do it all over again, except it's like a little bit different. You know what I mean? You get to go back to that home screen, but it's not all like celebration. Like there's still, a ways to go. Like you can, and but that's the good thing about like the creative journey. Cause if you do beat the game, like then it's like, then what? You know what I mean? You spend all this time getting to this place and then what? And I think that it's important to realize that like once you hit that goalpost, you realize that the field has just like expanded doubly. You know what I mean? And you won't be able to see exactly like what that next phase will be unless you reach that like kind of end point, which is actually like really a midpoint.
It's like I love this way of thinking about it too. If anybody's familiar with Zelda's like one of my all-time favorite things, not just favorite games. It's another hero's journey, actually, because Link is the chosen one. And I think so many creative people either don't realize that they need to do the first half of the journey to get the master sword, pull the master sword from the stone, or they think the game's over when they got the master sword, where it's like, I got my gift, now I'm a badass and everything's going to be amazing. But you're like, no, you got the weapon. Now you have your tool. You got a whole other journey to go defeat Ganon. Now the real tough work starts. It's magical that you were the chosen one to pull this sword from the stone. And that's fantastic. Great. We'll celebrate it for 15 seconds. Now it's time to get back on the path and go kick Ganon's butt. And I think both of these, when I first started out, I think I was so desperate to give away my gift that I didn't realize I didn't have one. And I think that a lot of people get into that trouble. There's this quote, a lot of this comes from this quote from Picasso, and he said that the meaning of life is to find your gift and the purpose of life is to give it away. And I think depending on your personality, I think people get stuck on either side of that. Either we want to give away a gift we don't have, or we just want to wallow in the meaning of our gift and not put in the time and energy to actually give it away. And both parts of the equation are a long journey and require all kinds of different types of energy. And that equation right there is at the heart of everything in the podcast. For me, the thesis of the podcast came on a phone call with a friend when I realized what it is I was really looking for. And that just opened up this crazy door and crazy clarity. And it's this, and it's the same definition said in a different way. All I'm looking for in my creative career is to find my gift and to find who needs it. And what I realized was all I really wanted was to find the thing that I could do that just exploded from me, that I was just like, oh man, I could do this forever. I love it. It feels natural. I feel like I'm tapping into supernatural territory. And then find a place in the world where people were raving about that gift because they were so desperate for it. And if you think about your creative career, who isn't looking for that? They're looking for what's amazing about what I've got and how can I find the people that are crazy in need for it? And if you've got that, everything else is solved. And so for me, that is the fundamental bedrock of the podcast. And that's why I wanted to do a whole series about it.
Absolutely. You just mentioned like the fact that you didn't have the gift at first, like, and so you have to find that. So, and this kind of gets into something else that I think we both try to tackle is that idea of self-doubt.
Sure.
So how then like sometimes you do get the feeling where you don't have the gift, and sometimes you actually don't have the gift because you haven't put the work in.
Right.
But how about sometimes when you do have the gift, but it doesn't really feel like it because it's not, you haven't really met your expectations.
And so it's important to note that getting too caught up on whether you have it or not can be its own obstacle of just getting on with the journey, right? Like overthinking, do I really have the supernatural thing? Do I have the gift or not? That ends up turning into self-doubt and turning into an obstacle from just continuing down the path in the first place. And so for me, I think this is a question about how you get over that kind of self-doubt. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. So I think it's important to note, look, we're going to go back to Harry Potter and spoiler alert. Seriously, this is one of the top spoilers. So if you're not caught up with Harry Potter, then you need to just fast forward at 15 seconds because
right.
Here's something.
And my listeners know that the only time, like, I don't bleep out curse words. The only time I bleep stuff out is like spoilers, like Game of Thrones, like is dead. Right, so like I'm gonna bleep out what I just said, but I'm not gonna bleep out what Andy's about to say.
That's right. So it's on you.
It's on you now.
I think this is probably common knowledge, but here's the thing. I always talk about self-doubt and all the obstacles that get in our way of our chosen destiny as Voldemort. And there are all these different versions of Voldemort. Voldemort hides 6 parts of himself into these things called Horcruxes that keep him alive indefinitely. And the trickiest one is that one of the places he hides this Horcrux, this thing that's stopping you, is in your own head. Because Harry Potter has that scar on his head, right? That's one of the Horcruxes. You find out in the last book that part of Voldemort is living inside Harry. And I really deeply believe that your self-doubt is one of those Horcruxes. Your biggest enemy is in your own head, right? And so I think that for me personally, I realize that it's just incredibly important to understand that you can be your own biggest enemy. And just, I think half of the battle is just realizing that perspective, just realizing that you are stopping yourself before you ever have the chance to get started. One of the things that I see in creative people all the time, and it just breaks my heart, is that in this current culture that we're in with this public shaming, the call out culture online, and then even, I think that, I think there's a lot of progress being made in our culture that I totally support. I support everybody being able to be themselves and to work out their own decisions on their own terms and be who they want to be. I support all of that. I think one of the things that, one of the unintended consequences of political correctness. So I'm not against political correctness. I'm not one of those guys that's out there saying everything's too politically correct and da-da-da-da-da. But I am saying that because of the scrutiny in which we run every person on this planet through at this day and age, and because we do it publicly through shaming and critique, and there are a lot of people that are completely have terrible intentions and are doing terrible things and they deserve to be called out. But there are a lot of people who are learning as they go on their journey with the best of intentions, and they fumble the ball and everybody piles on the hatred and the critique, right? And because of that, I think we're in this current state as creative people where so many of the people I work with are just so frightened of saying the wrong thing. They're so frightened of putting themselves out there in fear that they're going to get pummeled. And that self-doubt is the thing that's going to stop you from ever making anything or any progress. And my attitude about that is you need to be willing to make mistakes. Always have the best intentions, but don't stop yourself before you even get started. And that's kind of my biggest issue that I take with self-doubt. It has the ability to get you off the track before you even get started. And I think it's important to recognize that.
Right. And also during the creative process to try to, and this is something we talk about a lot, is to try to forget about all of that stuff that's going to come after you hit publish or share it with somebody else. It's like trying to have that like be a separate process of like imagining your audience or imagining the quote backlash that you're going to get, or if it happens, this one little word or this one little image could be misconstrued in some way, and thinking about the hell that could happen after that happens. Because I do agree that I think people, the social media world and the fake news and all this other we can get into, we won't get into because we won't add to it, but that just taking all of that kind of imagined backlash that you're going to get away from the equation and then evaluating it afterward. You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally true. And I think that one of the things I always try to say is that you would be so lucky if what you make turns into a public conversation. Like, you'd be so lucky if people were paying attention to that intently that they notice you stepping out of bounds, because it means people are watching. And actually, the further I've gone in my path and the more I've started to enter some territory where I am having some public critique, I try to remember that. I try to remember, like, I'm lucky that people care enough about what I'm doing and are watching it that I get that I'm getting this kind of level of scrutiny, because that's what we ultimately all want, our work to get out there into the world. And I always kind of say it like, best case scenario, you're going to get some scrutiny because people are going to be looking at it and caring enough to actually think about it. And I think that attitude has helped me. The other thing I want to just say real quick is that I think it's important to note that as you're going along on your journey, I think subconsciously there's a part of our intuition. I could get really bizarre here. It's not a belief that I – this isn't actually one of my – like a thing that I believe, but I love to toy with ideas that are helpful, even if they're bizarre. So one of them is our mind is capable of 11-dimensional models. And if you think about 11 dimensions, all of the dimensionality of the universe, in that realm above space-time, there is no time. So if your brain can exist in those higher levels, it's possible that part of your brain has the ability to exist beyond time. And then possibly your intuition, that gut reaction, maybe has clues from the future that you can't know in your 5 senses because you're locked into time. Does that make any sense before I go any further?
It does. My latest music video is all about that. So.
Oh, really? All right. So okay. It doesn't matter if that's true. It's just an interesting idea that leads to this. So if your intuition has a sense of what your gift is, what your work is, and knows where you're headed, your conscious mind and your, the monkey, lizard brain sides of your brain that are kind of animal and just trying to keep you safe, they are going to catalog every time someone says something that puts down your calling. Like whatever the word, let's say you're going to be a decorator, let's say you're going to be a writer, let's say you're going to work in TV, whatever it is. Those are like broad versions of what I mean. It could go way more specific than that. But let's say your intuition knows where you're trying to head. It knows your true gift. The part of you that's self-conscious and just trying to play it safe, every time someone disses your future work, you're going to catalog that into your brain because you're sensitive to it, because they're talking about you. And so one of the things I noticed as I was going through my journey is that anytime someone would say a comment that really was like searing and really dismantled and deconstructed what I felt like was my work and what I felt like was important, like if they made a really good point about how dumb it was to spend your life being an illustrator, I would catalog that. Or something that disqualified me. If they said something that I felt like, well, you can't really be a great illustrator if you don't go to art school because you can't possibly know da-da-da-da-da. That's just a silly example, and it's usually more specific than that. But that kind of idea that disqualifies you from the race, there's this part of your subconscious that's going to catalog that notion, and it's going to come back to haunt you every time you need to perform. And so I think it's just important to kind of step out of the matrix for a minute, realize that there's part of your brain that's working against your future, i.e. self-doubt, and just notice it and be like, I see you there. I see you're trying to keep me safe, but I'm going to go ahead and do this anyway. And let's see how the cards fall. Let's see how it all plays out.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's because that thing's never going to go away.
No, it's going to be there forever. It's probably going to get stronger the further you go.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's just kind of living with it, embracing it almost.
Totally. Yes.
So then what happens when voices like that, or maybe not even anything you can really understand, leads to creative block? Like, what if you're just not able to come up with the good ideas that you came up with before? The self-doubt starts creeping in where, I'm not going to be able to create anything good again. You just can't come up with the next idea.
So, okay. I have a really weird perspective on creative block, and it comes from my own experience, and then I've heard it articulated. There's this talk on 99u.com by Jad Abumrad, who's one of the hosts from Radiolab.
Love it.
Oh yeah, he's so awesome. And that show's great. He has this talk about gut churn, and he put words to this thing that I've been experiencing. And actually, there's another person called Cal Newport. He has a book called Deep Work where he talks about the same thing. And this is me getting back to this idea of thinking versus overthinking. And one of the things that I think happens is that I think a lot of us articulate creative block as we think it's a roadblock. We think that it's a brick wall stopping us from doing anything. And it's really more of a speed bump. It's more of an obstacle to get over to get to the actual work. And so in that talk, on 99U, Jad talks about how when they were first starting out on Radiolab, they eventually innovated what it looked like to do a radio show. There was just all of this time spent kind of beating his head against the wall of like, I just don't know how to figure this out. I just don't know how to make this original. I just don't know what our voice is. And just gut churn, this feeling inside that's just a terrible feeling, this feeling of like not having the answers and not knowing where they're going to come from. And I think a lot of people articulate that as creative block, like when it's just not happening, And I think that, whenever you get into that zone where it's just you're hitting a brick wall with your creativity, I think a lot of people's advice is to turn around and go the other way. So a lot of people would say, you bring them this problem, like I'm working on this creative problem. I'm trying as hard as I can. I just can't find the answer and it's just driving me mad and I'm just totally in this creative block. I think 99% of people, 99% of Americans are going to give you the advice, quit overthinking it. Quit overthinking it. Meaning step away, just do something different. Quit trying so hard, accept a worse solution because you're really making it harder for yourself than you really need to. And I actually think that advice is terrible. In my own experience, the biggest breakthroughs come from sitting in that uncomfortable place, sitting in that gut churn. And Jad says the same thing, and Cal Newport calls it deep work, where you're wrestling with a thing that you can't Google the answer to. When you're wrestling to a thing where the only answer is to keep thinking, think harder, think longer, keep hacking away at it, even in the uncomfortable spot until you have that moment. Keep digging, believing that the gold is under there the longer you go. And for so many people, because they've been given this advice to not overthink it, they never get to the gold. And I love that the beginning of the new Chappelle special on Netflix is him, and it's Morgan Freeman doing a voiceover while he's like staring into the distance. He's like sat at a table staring blankly for like 5 minutes straight. And it says, "This is Dave Chappelle's creative process." And I was like, yes, that's it. Like, I will go on a walk when I have to get a new podcast idea. I'll go on like an hour-long walk, and the first 45 minutes are so uncomfortable. And I know that something's there. I know there's some gold. I have an inkling of a thing, but I'm in that what a lot of people would call creative block. And I'm going through self-doubt. I'm going through there's nothing here. I'm not going to figure it out. I'm not going to get that piece. It's just the uncomfortable unknown. When we don't know the answer, it's uncomfortable. And I think instead of calling it overthinking and turning away, my advice is dig deeper, sit in it, keep working at it, bang your head against the wall. That's, for me, where the real ideas come from.
Right. And yeah, I agree that the stop overthinking it is kind of weird advice because how do you underthink something? Like, how do you so am I supposed to like keep thinking about it, but just not as hard? Like am I supposed to ignore it? Like, but so what would your advice then be to like deal with the frustration of that? Because I think it's the most frustrating thing when, like you said, there's a solution somewhere, like it exists somewhere. And I think that the somewhere is like in the future, like you said, like if we're thinking 11th dimensionally, like it exists like on the timeline of your life, and you know that it exists. It's just you like you can't get there.
Notion. And let me say, there's a few different things I want to just say here. One is, this whole overthinking thing, I think it comes from the Industrial Revolution. I think it comes from generations of people who have been taught to regurgitate information, to do as they're told. The people that do as they're told the best get the best jobs. And that was the factory model. Whereas the more efficiently you can do what you're told and the harder you can work at not thinking and just doing what someone else thought up and told you to do, that's where I think that overthinking thing comes from. It's just like, quit thinking, basically. That's what overthinking means a lot of times. Just quit thinking, because thinking gets you in trouble. Thinking doesn't add to the profitability of the factory. But this day and age, the economy is completely different. And I think it's going to go to and I'm not alone in this. There's tons of people that are smarter than me that would agree with this. The future is going to be for the thinkers, the people that will sit in the gut churn. And what I would say to people that are in those places of that uncomfortable state of unknown is trust your gut, trust your intuition. If there's a voice that says there's a solution here, I just cannot see it, keep digging and digging and digging and keep taking note of what you're learning and keep making new connections, keep trying it. That's the most interesting creative work that I've ever done has worked in that way. And I think it resembles like Pixar's process, and they're masters at writing films. Their success rate is out of this world in terms of creative success. And if you know anything about their storytelling, you know that they just gut churn the heck out of these things. They just work it out over and over, and they start from scratch and they try it again. They're like, no, it's not it. It's not that. Maybe it's this. No, it's not that. And the last thing I would say about this is if your gut says something's there, believe it enough to dig far enough to get to the gold. Don't stop before you get it. And then the last thing I want to say is once you train your brain to find these hidden gems, eventually the uncomfortable unknown, the journey, actually becomes the fun part. One of the reasons it's not fun early on when you're trying to solve these creative problems is because you don't know if you're going to fail. But once you become kind of a master, so to speak, at it, and you get really good at it, you have the confidence to know that all of this work is going to pay off. All of a sudden, now when I go on those walks, I kid you not, like 9 times out of 10, when I hit that wall, I kind of, I love the idea of like, it's kind of like when you're in the ring and someone punches you in the face and you fall to the floor and the guy's like, yeah, and you stand back up and you just wipe the blood off and smirk. You're like, haha, like that. It's like that. It's like now when I'm hitting that brick wall, because I have the confidence that I know when I know something's there, even when I don't know what it is, that's the fun. That's when I'm like, this is the most fun that there is in creativity, when you're actually right in the middle of it, working it out. And so that's my encouragement, is that once you train that muscle, that uncomfortable unknown actually becomes the best part of the journey.
It's just like dealing with all of these, the voices in your head, like knowing that that's always going to be there, knowing that the brick wall's always going to come, and just like embracing that whole part of the creative process and enjoying it. The only way to enjoy it is to do it with practice. So totally.
And I think for me, that's a thing that I'm always trying to do is like, I always say that I'm kind of like one part creative Yoda, one part creative Michael Scott. And so it's, I'm definitely not Yoda and I'm not quite Michael Scott, but I'm somewhere in between that. And I just feel like my duty is to anytime you find yourself in the guide position, I think it's not so much about giving people answers as it is helping them know the right questions to ask. And so, when they find themselves on the journey in a tough spot, it's not so much saying, here's how you get out of that spot. It's saying, yeah, that's the exact spot you need to be in. So that's a good sign. And just identifying self-doubt, brick walls, creative block, all that stuff, instead of running from it and trying to get away from it, just saying, yep, that means you're on the right track. That's exactly what it should feel like to be on your path.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that you are the perfect tour guide for the creative process and a really good sensei. So
at least I can be entertaining on the journey. I don't know how much insight I can provide, but at least I can provide some ridiculous analogies a la Michael Scott. So
I love it.
Yeah.
Dude, this has been awesome, but we are running out of time. And I like to end the show with what we call the final push.
Sure.
And this is where I just ask you to kind of reach through the microphone and grab the shoulder of one of the listeners that you've already really inspired today and just give them your best final words of advice and really push them to pursue their own creative passions.
Totally.
Or pep them up, I guess.
I know how to pep people up. And I will say this, the number one thing that I just come back to over and over and over again is that the thing that I see that is hurting so many creative people right now is that they're stuck looking for shortcuts when they should be satisfied with finding what I call surecuts, a direction that's a sure thing, just finding the path at all. Finding the path at all is difficult enough. Within the creative world, there's so many variables. There is so much magic. There is so much lottery. There is all of that. Finding a path at all, finding a pattern that you can base a plan on to get slowly but surely further in your creative career is the battle that you need to be in. If you're spending your time trying to get ahead and hack your way and find shortcuts, you're going to be spinning your wheels. All of those shortcuts are actually long cuts in the long term. And so my encouragement to you is quit trying to go viral. Quit trying to have overnight success. Quit looking for shortcuts and just get on the journey. 5 years from now, that slow but sure path will not be a regret. When 5 years from now, when you spend looking for 1 billion different shortcuts along the way, and you ended up nowhere, you're going to regret that you didn't just get on the slow but sure path. Go start to explore the unknown. Start to work on becoming a master in your field, and then slowly but surely get it out there into the world. That's the encouragement I have. And the last thing I want to say is that there are shortcuts. There are paths. There are ways to succeed as a creative person without winning the viral lottery. I had some lucky breaks early on in my career that ended up turning into basically nothing. There's a lot of people on Instagram that have 400,000 followers and don't make a nickel on creative work every month. You don't have to find the explosive overnight success to win. Go find the real path, your path, dedicate yourself to it, and it won't actually take as long as you think as soon as you're willing to go the long road. That's my encouragement.
I love it. Yeah, the difference between shortcuts and shortcuts. I like that.
Yeah.
The other thing is if then you take all those shortcuts, then 5 years down the line, you're not a real wizard.
No,
you know
not.
what I mean? Like, you don't know how to do real magic. You can do some parlor tricks, but
that's right. If you get in front of Voldemort and you hacked your way through every class, he is going to eat you up and spit you out, right? You need to go through level by level. So by the time you're in front of the dragon, you are totally and utterly prepared. You went through each level, you got the master sword, and now you're ready. And that's why I'm so, I'm always working against the people that are trying to find the shortcuts to success. It's hard enough to find success with the long cut. Yeah, So that's kind of my encouragement. Just get working. If you put time and energy into it, creativity is like anything else. It will pay off. If you invest that, it will eventually compound with interest, and it will take you interesting places if you're willing to just put in the hard work.
Dude, Andy, thank you so much for coming on the show today, for giving us that push, for giving us that pep. And
Absolutely.
It's just like a real pleasure to meet you in real life, or
Fantastic.
in the internet life.
Internet life, yeah. Voice to voice. I'm really happy I got to be on the show. And hey, don't forget, if you want to get a little bit of the weird flavored pep that I'm bringing, go check out my podcast at Creative Pep Talk.
CreativePepTalk.com. And you can find Andy on his website, as we said, andyj.pizza.
Yeah. Or on iTunes, SoundCloud, whatever.
Okay, cool. And we'll have all of that linked up at today's show notes page at yourcreativepush.com/AndyJMiller, or AndyJPizza.
Yeah.
Or Dr. P. You know what? Any iteration of Andy J. Miller Pizza, you can find it there. Thank you so much, man.
Thanks, man. Thanks for having me.
Oh, man, huge thank you once again to Andy for coming on the show. It felt really nice to have these two podcasts kind of come together to give you guys more options when you need more of a push or more of a pep in your creative life. I'm not even going to give you much of an outro here because I think Andy just crushed in this episode. And if you want more, go and subscribe to his podcast. That's going to be my call to action for you guys. Head to creativepeptalk.com to find the easiest way for you to subscribe to that podcast. And then you'll have a new weapon in your arsenal, a new master sword as you try to battle creative blocks or laziness or whatever else it is that is holding you back from getting to your creative passion. I do want to mention that in the next episode, we will have Matthew Quick. Matthew is an Australian artist who uses narrative realism in paintings and sculptures to provoke the viewer and to tell stories. When I first saw his art, I thought it was photographs. He is so technically skilled, but he also does some pretty cool things with his art to really start a conversation, which is what art is all about. If you want to check out his art before the show, you can go to matthewquick.com.au, or you can find him on Instagram at MatthewQuickArt, and we'll have all of that linked up again in today's show notes page at yourcreativepush.com/241. But that is all I've got for you today. Hopefully you were inspired and pepped up to go and get your work done. So go and get it done, and we will be here for you on Thursday if you need the push again. I love you all. Go and get some amazing work done, and we will see you next time. Bye. Never miss a push. Head to yourcreativepush.com/subscribe to find the easiest way for you to subscribe to the podcast.